Welcome to a very special episode of the All Pop No Culture podcast. You can see from my background, we've got some comic book stuff back here. We have a very special guest this week. A friend of Andrew's, Bryant, happens to also be friends with a comic book artist from the 80s and early 90s, I think. His name is Bill Spangler. He made the time to come on our show, which is really cool because this is the first time we've had somebody that isn't directly associated with somebody on the show as a guest, and also somebody that, has done something really cool creatively, professionally. So while we've had Risky on before, who was really cool as a DJ and does some art with action figures and things like that, this is the first creative professional that we've had on the show before. So it's really interesting. It was a lot of fun to do this interview. I think Bill is fantastic, and I really thank Bryant for getting us in contact with him and coming on with him. And I really hope you enjoy the interview because I think Bill is an absolutely fascinating guy and was a lot of fun to talk to. Yeah, it's cool. We haven't had a genuine guest on here that we didn't already know. That I think
Yeah, there's
historically it's either, other than Lauren, who I do the show with a lot of the time, who is friends with Andrew,
mhm.
everybody else kind of went to high school together and kind of organically came together to do this. So
Right.
to have a real guest is both awesome and a little terrifying. So hopefully
Well, Bryant and I used to work on the same newspaper together,
okay.
Yeah,
and then he started coming to some of my signings, and it kind of grew from there.
That's
yeah,
very cool.
for sure. Yeah, it's yeah, I started an internship just 2 summers of internship at a local paper and then it was such a thrill to meet Bill at this place. It was just so funny because and just one of those wonderful kind of things. It's like, okay, I'm a Robotech fan and comic book nut in general. Um, yeah, and here's this guy and he's writing the very comics that I've been picking up for some time,
Yeah,
and
that's really cool. Like it's also I think it's cool to meet people that are, into the same things as you, but then to find somebody that was like involved in the creative process, that I think is really awesome.
yeah, yeah. So well, you've had guests, but I just correct me if I'm wrong. I suppose Bill is your first professional, writer guest, someone
Yeah.
who's actually worked on some well-known properties.
Yeah.
Most of what I'm known for are comics set in the Robotech universe.
Mhm.
But as your background shows, I did some original stories with Alien Nation and some original characters. I did an issue of a Quantum Leap comic for Innovation way back in the day. This was the original Quantum Leap.
Yeah. Back when it was still like great,
Yeah,
the Scott Bakula series. Yeah.
we managed to do something that nobody had done before with Quantum Leap, although the scheduling you wouldn't tell. I pitched a story to Universal. I wanted to do a story from the viewpoint of the guy who wakes up in the Quantum Leap lab in Sam's body.
Oh, okay.
And and this and there was some question whether Universal would let us do that because it wasn't the sort of story they were doing on Quantum Leap.
Right.
But George Broderick, my line editor, and the publisher backed me on this, and we were able to submit the story. Weirdly enough, though, the Quantum Leap TV show did do a story with that premise like 2 weeks before the comic came
Of
out.
course. So were you involved with the Quantum Leap folks at the time, or was it just an idea that you had that you just threw to them and took a shot?
Well, we had been following it, and I just wanted to do something that would, kind of, well, so, pardon the cliche, but push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank on the publisher's name right now, but he liked the idea, but he didn't think Universal would buy it. But we managed to get into a position that Universal would buy.
That's awesome. And that was you said it was a single episode comic or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Innovations Quantum Leap Comics went 12 issues. Mine was issue 8 or 9. I don't know. I did have I did have a couple of short-lived comics with original characters, but mostly I've done licensed stuff, original stories, but
Hmm.
licensed things. I I did 12 issues of an old space opera character from the 50s called Tom Corbett, Space Cadet.
I
Uh,
saw that one out there. Yeah.
I had hit Tom Corbett as a kid, so it was a strong nostalgic connection. When I heard that Eternity had gotten the license, I I had a proposal in their hands within 24 hours, and they gave it to me 24 hours after that, so it worked out really well.
That's awesome. So Andrew knows that I do a little writing on my own. I've written like a one-time TV pilot that has been in a couple contests, hasn't gotten in anybody's hands or anything like that, but I've done that. I've done some long form writing, so I'm familiar with a young writing process. You obviously have done it for a long time. Um, so you started, I would assume, I mean, I was looking you up, you were born in 54
Right?
and you were working on the Robotech in the 80s. So, I mean, what did you do from, I don't know, like the 70s to the 80s till you started Robotech? Did you just start in comics
Largely,
or?
I wrote for newspapers. I did sell a couple of prose short stories uh, uh, about that same time. They were in gentlemen's magazines, but it was a pro sale.
Yeah. Well, I know Stephen King, that was his big thing. He sold to Playboy all the time.
Uh, Bryant's heard at least part of the story, but I'll tell it again. This was at the very beginning of the direct sales market for comics,
Mhm.
and Eternity Comics running an open call for submissions. And I sent them a proposal for a character I called Bloodwing. The short description of Bloodwing is uh, Blade Runner meets the Shadow.
Okay.
And honestly, I didn't expect to sell it. I thought I might get like, well, okay, but I want to go take this one, but what else do you have? I thought I could get that
Mhm.
far, but they bought it. We did, I guess, 9 episodes of Bloodwing altogether in various formats, and so I've adapted a lot of things. We did a graphic novel adaptation of H.G. Wells' Time Machine. I'm very proud of, and some adaptations of a lesser known Larry Niven character called Gildy Arm.
Robotech obviously is the big like your big deal, right? Like you got into Robotech and that was that
Yeah.
was that the same kind of thing? Was it an open kind of call or did you submit for that and they just went off
What
to
had
the
happened
others?
was what had happened was I had done two limited series for Eternity, Bloodwing, and another thing we called the Argonauts, which was this
Hmm.
kind of pulp pastiche, sort of Buckaroo Banzai, Doc Savage, that's that sort of thing. And I had heard that Eternity had gotten the rights to do a Robotech comic once it passed out of Kamiko's hands. So naturally, I inquired to see what was going on, and they said that they had already worked up the creative team for the Sentinels comics, but they wanted to do something set in the Malcontent Uprising. So, do you want to pitch something? And that's how I got it. It was a little more complicated than the other proposals because um, Harmony Gold wanted to see some actual script pages from me first
Hmm.
uh, before they would approve it. But I did some script pages, and it was all good.
Yeah, so
And
let me ask you, Kevin, because I know Andrew and of course Bill and me, we're familiar with Robotech, maybe, we're- and from Andrew and I, our point of view, we're fans, we're really big fans. From Bill's point of view, he actually has done stuff with Robotech. Have you? What do you know about Robotech?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I watched Robotech a lot. Now, I growing up, I Robotech, Transformers, Voltron, like it was like that trifecta of cartoons that were like everything when you were a kid, right? And some G.I. Joe, throw that in there too. But like those were actually the cartoons that I grew up on. Now, story wise, I forgot most of it growing up. It always kind of lived in my mind as the things that I loved, but I didn't remember a lot of it.
Mhm.
And so, funny enough, just I think last year, I think me and my son went through and rewatched I think all of the Robotech series.
maybe I should note here too. Um, My wife Joyce knew the first generation of anime, Astro Boy, Marine
Hmm.
Boy, those characters. Uh, it was much later for me. My younger brother left me an audio tape of Star Blazers,
Oh,
and
I love Star Blazers.
he said, you should listen to this. This is pretty decent." And I did, and I got interested in anime, and that's how the connections were made.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Star Blazers was the one that one always felt to me like the one that people didn't talk about as much when, from the 80s. But I remember I loved that one. Like the I know in the I forget what it was called in the Japanese original Japanese, but in the English version they call it the Argo. And like I tried to draw that thing. I was terrible. I couldn't draw for anything, but tried to draw it every day. Like I love Star Blazers. Yeah, so that makes sense. And that feels like a spiritual cousin to Robotech in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. It is a spiritual cousin or just predecessor or
yeah,
just one of the predecessors, important predecessors to Robotech.
yeah.
Um, and Robotech is comprised of three different anime series that were
Mhm.
never really meant to go together, but for syndication purposes, um, Harmony Gold through Carl Masick. Carl Masick was really the orchestrator for combining three different anime series to come up with a thread line of something that connected them together story wise. Even though, yes, I'm not really in favor of this kind of practice these days, but you know, it's it's like it's like
It was a whole different time.
it's a whole
It was
different
a whole
Yeah.
time.
different
And
time.
right,
Home entertainment
yeah,
didn't exist yet.
I've loved Robotech once I really got into it. Yeah, and I just love the serial effect of it, and yes, plenty of parallels between that and Star Blazers. Star Blazers was so ahead of its time. It's just like
Yeah.
Hmm.
because they had long storylines that was
Yes.
essentially a season. It had parallel to soap operas, daytime soap operas were, but unlike soaps, this was cool. In a way, they stayed much closer to the storyline because of the casualties that were like
Hmm.
this was a real war happening because beloved characters would die and not just once out of like a season. Yeah, it was not a one-off kind of thing. It would just actually happen on a fairly routine kind of basis. And
Yeah.
and yes, and there was cannon fodder on both sides that were just getting wiped out. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I want to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, one of the questions I definitely want to ask, Bill, of course, is what was your familiarity with the Robotech universe before you pitched, Eternity Comics? But
Yeah.
before that, I just want to gush poetic for a second, just to say that everything that you guys were saying about Robotech being kind of a gateway to anime. And even the whole practice of bringing it all together, separate anime. I mean, we all know, you mentioned it, Kevin, that Voltron World Events did the same thing where they took Go Lion, which was an accident, and Die Ruger XD, and they're going to take a third one, but
Hmm.
they didn't end up doing it. But I think that Carl Masick, in a way, was kind of like a pre Kevin Feige in a way, because I mean, I know he was also responsible, I believe, for Streamline Pictures. Akira is held up as one of these like paragons of anime, and
Yeah.
that was brought over by him, so he was producer. So I think that the story that he came up with protoculture, taking it from, this is what our old culture
Yeah.
used to be, to a fuel source, basically like Vril from the Vrilya, and then of course having like the Master series, the Southern Cross. Like if you watch that original anime, is nowhere near as good as the Robotech version. And then of course even Los Pieta, like you just, when you tie it all together, and and Scott is trying to get Admiral Hunter back. I'm sorry, there's more gravitas. We Will Win hits the goosebumps harder than the other song that they use in the original. Not knocking Macross, I'm not, but I'm just saying it's one of the few examples where I think that the adaptation in some ways is superior than the source material. But God bless the source material. Last but
Yeah.
not least, and I'm doing this because I gush a lot, and then we're gonna go to the question I remember now. Gundam. We have to remember
Mhm.
that Gundam was the real robot
yeah,
genre. From what I understand, Macross originally, when it was being developed, was supposed to be kind of a parody of Gundam, but then they realized, wait a minute, let's actually make a real like series. So there's this character named Gundam who is very much inspired Roy Fokker, for example.
Okay.
So that all of that said, turning the microphone back to Bill. Thank you so much for letting me get all that out.
No
Um,
problem.
what was your familiarity with the lore when you pitched it?
Well, we were fairly familiar with it. We had seen the whole series twice, maybe three times.
Okay.
In the market we were in, it actually ran 7:30 in the morning. It wasn't an after school thing.
Yeah.
And so I was pretty familiar with it. And I had started to buy the novelizations when it came to actually pitching the comic. I didn't have a whole. Actually, the show was off by the time I pitched the comic, so I
Wow.
had to work from the
Yeah.
novelizations and a couple of the reference books. Robotech Art One in particular. One of my goals, it wasn't this clear in my mind, but this is what I was going for. A chance to do this. I wanted to come up with the biggest reveal I could come up with for a Robotech story without having to declare this as being a parallel timeline.
Mhm.
And if you're familiar with the comic, you know what reveal I'm talking about. And, General Leonard's secret life, let's call
Right.
it.
Yes.
And they had no problem. Harmony Gold at the time had no problem with that. Like I said, they wanted to see a sample script page from me, and they let me go.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, you certainly had some major reveals and just actually you gave real character depth
Yeah.
to Leonard. The object is to tell a good story. You can tell a good
Yeah.
story, and there are actually people who are so pro Leonard. And yeah, he's an important figure and all that, but man, he just comes off like a major ass. And so it's
Well,
just
my
yeah,
understanding, there are
it's
still
just
people who are
and,
very pro Leonard.
yeah, but yeah, it's like he's the heel in the wrestling match. I believe Cormac makes it had penned that one description in one of the art books
Right,
about Leonard, right, being a bigot, right? And
right,
so yeah,
exactly.
it's like, and when you have aliens who are slaughtering much of the human race, yeah, there's going to be folks who will not forget, and they don't believe in any kind of reformed aliens, and he fits that mold. So there's an understanding of where Leonard comes from, if not full approval of what he does, you know?
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of that came from Robotech Art One. And I told Leonard is a pathetic bigot. That's the first line of the bio.
It's funny. The fact that he has fans though in the real world reminds me of kind of how Homelander from The Boys is
Mhm.
definitely, I think, portrayed as kind of a narcissistic, like socio and psychopath. And yet there's people who actually kind of thought he was the good guy like the whole time. It's really funny how you can never necessarily predict how some characters will land with certain audiences.
Yeah. Give them
Right.
the right charisma, and it doesn't matter if they're good or bad. People will be drawn to them.
Right. And I was blown away when I found out that the voice for Captain Global,
Yeah.
one of the best good guys in the series, right,
Same person.
is the same voice for Supreme Commander Leonard. It's like, and he does so well with both of them. But man, I mean, if you don't love to hate the guy, then perhaps something's amiss here. But it's like I can't see how you can't have that outlook about this character because Greg Finley had done such a great job, with doing that.
Oh yeah. One of the things that for me later on, as your backdrop points out, I did some issues set in the Alien Nation universe, and in a sense, that's an extension of the Robotech universe because it's about two races trying to get along on the same planet. And so thematically, I was very comfortable with it, and I guess Eternity was too. That's why they gave it to me.
How long did that one run for?
Oh, 6 issues altogether. There was a 4 issue original story, um, and through various machinations I don't even remember now, I found the script for what was supposed to be the beginning of the second season, which never happened,
Mhm.
and we adapted that. And there was also an alternate version of the first issue of Alien Nation that had an extra 5 pages in it. I guess that's what I was thinking when I said 6 issues.
Yeah, Alien Nation. I remember the series, but I think I was too young to watch it at the time. Um, but it was basically the aliens were living on Earth already, right? It just
Right,
started with them already here, and it was about coexistence and all
right,
that. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and that had to. I mean, to be fair, it's got to be complicated to come into an existing IP and then, adapt those characters without losing those characters, but still, push them forward.
Yeah. The original story, actually, I did only had a very minor use of the TV character. I created another team that was solving a different
Mm.
mystery. A Tenginese newcomer and a human woman. Because they hadn't done that team up yet on the TV show, and that's what I ended up focusing on. Oh, one of the things that I'm kind of proud of with Alien Nation, Eternity commissioned 3 or 4 series from different writers. We ended up using each other's characters in cameos. In the different comics, kind of a vaguely Marvel Universe sort of thing, I
Yeah.
suppose. I was proud that we kind of mix things up a little bit that way.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be really fun. When you go into do a comic book, how much of your creative process after you've got the idea and you've got to kind of script it out, how much time do you spend with the artists, or do you just pass it off to them and let them go?
Largely, I don't have a lot of conversations with the artist. Tim Eldred and I work together pretty closely on Invid War, but largely it just never worked that way. What I've what I've tried to do is, uh, you know, I would tell the artist at the beginning, directly or indirectly, uh, do what you feel comfortable with. Here's what I need. If you want to present it a different way or whatever you feel comfortable with, that's fine. I would not give them, super explicit instructions or anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
To Bill's credit, back when I was fanboying around him at that newspaper, I was trying to glean what I could about submitting stories to. He would provide maybe a sample of a script for me to look at. Bill has a really good way of just giving a lot of freedom to artists, just giving them just enough information to know where Bill's coming from for any kind of scene or any kind of story, and not get bogged down with a whole lot of details, like say Alan Moore. I mean, Alan Moore, is a giant in any kind of literary field, to be honest. Everyone here in some way has enjoyed his work, whether it's through his graphic novels or a movie or movies that have adapted his graphic novels. He can write pages and pages on just one comic book page describing what he wants for it.
That's my understanding.
But there's a way to do it. There's other ways to do it, and Bill certainly has a very, very great way of doing it, and something I could learn too once I really get back to seriously doing my own
I think a little bit may actually come from writing for newspapers, being concise.
If
Yeah.
I may, going back to the Robotech universe, because I can't help
Sure.
myself. When you were working on both the Malcontent Uprisings and Return to Macross, how much of that was you were given free reign versus was there kind of like some sort of Bible you had to kind of cleave to? I just want to understand, like, if you were kind of fleshing out something that had already been kind of outlined. I just want to understand, you know what I'm saying? Like, I want to understand how much of it was just 100%, I'm just going to town and do what I want, kind of like what Rian Johnson did with, like, the second Star Wars movie versus. So I hope you understand the thrust of my question.
I
I'd love
think so.
yeah.
With Malcontent Uprisings, I was not given a lot of restrictions from Harmony Gold. I kind of took some on my own. Um, Jim Lucino contacted me, and because he was writing the Zentradi Rebellion novel at that point, and he wanted to he wanted to introduce himself, and he wanted to make sure that Malcontents and the Zentradi Rebellion novel were as much in sync as possible. And so there was some give and take on that. I mean, there was no requirements to it, but we enjoyed working together, and I consider him a good friend.
Is there a particular issue? Do you remember that he initiated contact, like after you written like Mountain Uprisings number whatever issued
Oh gosh, that's a good question. 7 or 8, I think.
Oh wow, yeah, I wasn't aware of that. He actually contacted you during the series coming out.
So I want to make it clear then. So then your comics came first before the Zentradi Rebellion, if I'm understanding correctly.
Largely, yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. And the reason why I think that's a really big deal that you guys were able, like you weren't bound to kind of sync, but you just did, was I know that during Marvel television and Marvel movies, like the folks who were doing Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were trying to like try to stay with the movies, but eventually because they were under different like divisions, eventually the movies just did their own thing. So like they didn't know about the snap, and eventually the show stopped trying to like sync up with the movies. But you instead were like, no, let's go ahead and make sure that we're building a coherent universe. And I think that's really remarkable, and I think it should be celebrated.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and I'll tell Jim you said so. He'll
Yeah.
appreciate that. Um, yeah, return him across. Return him across. I was more or less left by myself. The only restriction I got was is that uh, they wanted the Zentradi segments and the Return him across segments in the same issue. But my goal with Return across was sort of I, I wanted to make a first contact story that was taking place in the Robotech universe. You didn't have to be hip deep in the lore to understand what was going on. Whether I managed that, I don't know, but that was the goal. And the other goal was I wanted to make sure I got Roy Fokker right. I wanted to make sure he didn't sound too much like Max because that was my main character from Malcontents.
Beautiful.
I think maybe my best Roy Fokker moment was maybe at the very beginning. Um, he's arriving at Macross Island, and he's looking down at the SDF-1, and he kind of mutters both to the ship and to himself, I'm back, baby. Did you miss me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much his personality.
Yeah, and yeah, that's great. You mentioned Return of Macross because Jim, he was able to work in some things you introduced, like cult groups or something from that era into the novel. Right, to just be on the same page and just really have a respect for each other's work and what and admiration for what each the other person was doing. That's just really a terrific kind of thing. And the fact that he took the name that you gave to the Zentradi who delivered the micronized Miria to the SDF-1,
Yes, yes,
the name that you gave her, and you made her into a full-fledged character in Mountain Uprisings. But yeah, you made her into a living, breathing character from this one brief appearance on the show. Yeah, in the original publication of one of those novels, Celia de Para's name wasn't mentioned, just like the TV show. She wasn't given a name, you know.
right.
But when the omnibus came out, you know, Jim, I learned this because of one of our meetings at the newspaper. Jim had included the name that you gave her from the comic book, Malcontent Uprisings, for that
Right.
very scene, that story from that episode. Yeah, so it's just one of those terrific kind of things. It's like, yeah, if anyone's going to do a bit of editing on the Robotech novels, it should be the novelist. And that's another kind of thing. It's simple, just name inclusion and just from your stuff is just, yeah, it was just a kick.
Oh, another way that Jim and I interacted, uh, which was surprised me too, but he made it work. After Malcontent Uprisings, I did a 4-issue series called Cyber Pirates. It was not my best work, but I created a character. The protagonist for that was a guy named Terry Weston. And Jim Lucino took Terry Weston and made him the protagonist of 2 of his novels. So he got more use out of Terry than I did.
Nice.
So with all this stuff, so you worked on Robotech, you worked on some H.G. Wells, you did a bunch of stuff. So was science fiction always been like your first love, and how did you get into science fiction, from the beginning?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much my first love. I I used to tell people that I got into science fiction because NASA wasn't sending rockets up fast enough. And, and that's a factor in any case. Uh, but yeah, but because of my interest in space in general, I started reading science fiction magazines and science fiction comics. Not so, I mean, I got into a lot of the traditional superhero stuff, but I liked the more science fictional element to a character, the better I liked it. I mean, the original Green Lantern,
Hmm.
the original Hal Jordan character. DC had this um, uh, surrogate John Carter character called Adam Strange,
Hmm. Yeah.
that would go to a planet in another solar system every month. He was and is one of my favorites. And Gold Key, back when there was a Gold Key, had a comic called Magnus Robot Fighter. Which I was very much into because what was interesting about Magnus was is that they talked a lot about how uh, intelligent machines, AI, though they weren't using that term, would affect how people lived and how people thought, and all very sophisticated stuff for the mid 60s.
Yeah, I've always thought, especially if you go back to some of that older, 50s, 60s, maybe even early 70s science fiction, how much it feels like they got right about what is still future for us. Like if we look at where we're headed now, it feels like they were on track back then, especially with Asimov writing artificial intelligence and all that stuff. Um it seems like they had a grasp on it that we kind of overlook, but you guys knew what you were doing back then.
Yeah, well, it's always nice to find that stuff. I mean, it's kind of like talking about whether comic books are actually worth money. I mean, it's nice when it happens, but it doesn't have to happen all the time.
Yeah.
Um, Asimov did a short story uh, about a kid who could still do math in his head. I mean, this was considered a wonder in this futuristic society. I don't know.
Mm. Y- Yeah, and that's a great point because when you look at technology now, they've taken, I think, Apple's newest devices. You can just write your math problem on there with a pencil, and it'll just solve the problem for you. You don't even have to type it into a calculator anymore. You just write out your problem, and it does it for you. So, like, we really are at the point where we're using our brains less than we might need to because we've adapted this technology to do it for us.
I think one of the earliest examples for that is remember when you remembered people's phone numbers? And now the only
Yeah,
phone number I remember is mine.
yeah.
I mean, everybody else's number, and you
Yeah,
forget it.
yeah.
I mean, I know like my brother's number because like I'll put him down for like emergency contact. But even then, up until recently, I'd have to double check to make sure it was right. But yeah, like even cell phones, I think introduced the idea of okay, that brain space is now
Hmm.
like taken,
Yeah.
like gone.
A quote I've always liked about the predictive issue in science fiction. I'm not sure who actually said it first, but quote was, predicting the car is relatively easy. Predicting the drive-in is tougher. Predicting that teenagers will go to the drive-in to make out is almost impossible.
Yeah, yeah, it's those details, right? Like you can come up with the one thing, but when you start to put, I don't know,
Human
like
behavior.
yeah, just a reason for it being or what people will do with it around it. Yeah, that's definitely takes an additional set of brain cells that I think are extra creative.
Yeah, yeah, talking about the early space program stuff, I've been picking up what I call space kitsch, stuff you find in thrift stores mostly, and flea markets for publicity from the early days of the space program. One of the things I'm proudest about was I found a teacher's guide that NASA gave out to schools so that they could teach what was going on in space. You know, what was weightlessness? What did apogee mean? All that sort of thing. Yeah, like I said, one of them was kind of kitsch, but I dig it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like we almost take for granted now, right? We've been up in space for what 60 years, so it's less weird now, but in the 60s when we were in the space race and we are going through all that, that was all new information. Everything that we were learning about it was still to the general public was new information. So
Right.
Yeah, I can see where that would really drive that sci-fi mind to create more things in space and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, what about about the NASA space program? I had read an article some time ago in which, in order for us to get another man on the moon or something like that, and to really do it right, NASA needs to relearn things because, for one, the people that got us to the moon aren't there anymore. Two, to the materials that they used, it's just different materials at different time. It's great, really great, Bill, when you mentioned like your fascination with science fiction because real science is not it's not doing very well. Getting us to where we think we would like to be. Would love to just have have had a colony or some kind of base on Mars by now. That's just
Yeah.
not it's not the fact. It's like that meme. Oh, science fiction. You had such great hopes for us. It's like 2001 is it's like here's the one space odyssey. It's like real 2001 comes around. Wow, we had nothing. We have nothing like that.
Yeah, we're
It's
supposed to have flying
always
cars by now.
yeah.
Yeah, where's our flying cars?
Exactly. So, like going through all that, growing up with that, like who were the science fiction authors that like inspired you or that you looked to before you started doing this, and then obviously the people that you worked with helped you out through that too. But who got you going?
Well, I think early on I was a very big Asimov fan. Both uh, his novels. I was a very big fan of the original paperbacks that were written when Tom Corbett Space Cadet was on TV. That was a big deal for me because that was just about the only science fiction I could find in the library in my hometown, in the kids' library in my hometown. As time went on, I got a little more into some of the more British authors. I was and am still a big fan of Michael Moorcock. Right, well, she's not British. A woman named Lee Brackett who did a lot of space opera in the 50s and 60s and did the first draft of the script of The Empire Strikes Back.
Exactly. I remember I
Okay.
recognized the name.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, she also wrote she apparently also apparently wrote a couple of noir mysteries during that period in her career, which is why I think why Lucas hired her because she was so familiar with both science fiction and movies and knew what had to be done.
Nice.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool. That's really cool.
Actually,
Speaking, oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say it was almost piggybacking authors that you liked. Are there any authors? It could be a story like in book form, it could be teleplay, it could be film, where you almost think to yourself, man, I wish I had written that, for example, or at least you admire that, or it spoke to you in some way.
Well, I was in high school when I first saw it, so this may be a good example. Um, are you guys familiar with the British TV show The Prisoner?
It sounds
Actually,
familiar. I
no.
don't think I've seen it, but it
I
sounds
know. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I'm
check it
familiar.
out.
aware of it. I haven't have yet to actually fully check
Well,
out.
in the late 60s, an actor named Patrick McGowan he used to play a fairly straight spy. But he convinced his producer to let him leave the straight spy show and let him create this thing they called The Prisoner, which was uh, his spy character resigned, and then he was abducted and taken to this kind of surrealistic prison, which looked like a Victorian village, but you didn't know who was the guards and who was the prisoners, and it was guarded by this kind of organic weather balloon thingy that would stop you from leaving. And this was like one of the first real serialized shows. I mean, this is before Twin Peaks. This was before uh, X-Files, before Lost, because it went for 17 weeks, and yeah, I was in high school at the time, and it was like it took me 17 weeks to reattach my jaw. I mean, it was just an incredible show.
I'm gonna look it up. I'm reading it online
Yeah.
now, and it looks really cool. Like it talks about post like Orwellian themes and very much about individualism versus like being. It just seems very psychological and kind of big storytelling, grandiose.
Oh
So
yeah, very
thank
much
you.
so.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's fairly easy to find on various streaming services. Check out the first episode or two. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
so would you say like episodes of that show were pretty much open to interpretation, or and with maybe purpose
Oh yeah, very much so.
loose ends purposely there? Yeah. So yeah, I figure this is you know I think people who like perhaps shows like the like Lost,
Yeah.
my or Twin Peaks might get into this something like this. I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, very much so.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a conclusion of sorts, but it was shot in such a way that you kind of had to read between the lines to come to any decisions about what he was trying to say, and people are still trying to come to decisions about that.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like for anybody that wants to find it, looks like it's on Amazon Prime and Tubi. So if you want to watch it, it's out there. Um, but so sci-fi for me and for most people, if you think about when you think about sci-fi, you think of intelligent, heady stories and smart things. But one of my favorite sci-fi shows when I was maybe a little older than a kid, still a kid, was Red Dwarf. Did you ever watch that one from the Brits?
The first two or three seasons, I haven't watched it front to back, but yeah, that's good fun. Yeah,
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 Yeah, I'd watched Red Dwarf, some of that, and yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah, yeah, definitely a good fun
yeah,
show. Yeah,
yeah. Funny enough, I was just
yeah.
talking to my son about it the other day. It's just fun. It's weird. It's different, but they still manage to have some relatively intelligent stories and something that is definitely a more ridiculous kind of comedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thoroughly an adult by the time I came across it, but I'm a big Doctor Who fan in general.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, this last season I have arguments with, but there's still a lot of good stuff there, and it's amazing because they did some fairly ambitious stuff with no money.
Hmm. Yeah, the Brits were very good about that. They worked with what they had and they did a good job with it. Um, but speaking of low budget sci-fi projects that or things that they kind of made do with, I know the original Star Wars, a lot of the stuff that they did was not what we would consider technological marvels today. Like if you watch now in the HD versions, the sets you can kind of tell are like hand painted and created. There's the throne, not the throne room scenes, but the landing bay scenes. I think it's when the Emperor's coming out was literally hand painted. All those stormtroopers were painted
Yeah.
on on a mat. But I noticed that in some of your biography and stuff, you had worked on a Star Wars book, Star Wars on Trial.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I've written some about popular culture, and there was a publishing company that was doing various theme books. I contributed to one about Farscape, and one about Star Wars, and one about Lost. Actually, I they would
Yeah.
do uh, the yeah, like everything else, you kind of look for an angle that nobody else was doing.
Right.
Like for
Right.
Lost, you may or may not remember. Uh, there was a hell of a lot of books on those planes.
Hmm.
You would see a character reading a book in which you haven't seen in previous episodes and wouldn't see again. But and I catalog the books and what thematically maybe
Right.
why the Lost people wanted to use them, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. With that, I remember one of the most prevalent ones early on was Watership Down. Like that was kind of the in your face book
Yeah,
that Sawyer was reading.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny about Star Wars. The technology. I'm going to be the old codger here. The technology has advanced so quickly that some of the stuff in the very first film looks pretty shabby now.
Hmm.
Uh, but the first time you go to a theater, the first time we went to a theater in '77, and you see that Imperial cruiser coming overhead, and it's like, holy, it's a holy shit moment.
Yep.
yeah,
100%.
right. And Bill, and yeah, I remember you telling me the impact of when Princess Leia really takes charge of a situation. Can you
Yeah.
tell that to us?
Oh yeah. Well, one of the Star Wars on Trial in particular, what they would try to do is pro and con on the various issues. Are the women in Star Wars good? Are they good, strong figures? And I took the idea that mostly they are. But it depended on context at the time. When Princess Leia was introduced in Star Wars, the only equivalent we had was Ripley, maybe,
Hmm.
and actually, Emma Peel before that, but they were damn rare.
Oh, Emma Peel was the Avengers, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah, the other Avengers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ripley, she came after Star Wars. She was the first alien film. Yeah,
79. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
79. Yeah.
right.
Ripley
Yeah,
was actually after.
But
2 years.
yeah, but Bill, I remember you saying like as the two stormtrooper clad would be heroes, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, are stumbling their way trying to try execute a rescue of her. She does something that that jolted people like in the audience that you
yes,
were.
yes. They hadn't seen anything like her before, and sometimes you see the reaction. Yeah,
Yeah, she grabs a blaster and goes,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
fire
and
away.
and, and to with the original film, and I think I mentioned it in the article. Uh, she wasn't packing, but Luke's aunt. I mean, she was a pioneer woman. She's a tough woman. She knew how to she
Yeah.
knew how to make a living out of all that sand and stone.
Yep.
Star Wars, the first Star Wars is essentially took the sort of like the Disney kind of fairy tale and flipped it on its head. You
Yeah,
know, you have these do-gooders, a mascot of a sort of an animal type figure in Chewbacca, but a princess to save. The princess is showing you how to actually save a person to her would-be saviors, and it's full of attitude and gristle, and even with the line, the lines of text in the beginning, a long time ago in galaxy far away, it's essentially once upon a time.
right,
Um,
right.
yeah. I mean, of course, there's been other comparisons to other genres like the Western,
Hmm.
which is true too. I mean, yeah. So that's one of the great things about Star Wars is that it doesn't neatly fit in one thing entirely.
By the way, if you haven't, I've seen it. I recommend Farscape too. They that they set it up as kind of being the anti-Star Trek, but it works.
Hmm.
Because they would take a premise from a Star Trek episode and then push it about 6 weeks longer than Star Trek would ever do it.
Yeah. I've always meant to watch Farscape. Now, 2 years ago, I went on a Stargate marathon and I watched all of those, and I really enjoy Stargate and what they did in the last 2 or 3 seasons of Stargate SG-1 is they brought in a couple of the cast members from Farscape, and I think it's the 200th episode of Stargate where they kind of do a mock Farscape episode with all of the actors in there.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't see that. I'll have to look for that. That sounds like fun. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it
I know
was.
Claudia Black seemed to be having a great time on Stargate.
I
Uh,
fell in love with her on Stargate. She was amazing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Farscape's true stuff. But Stargate, I didn't need to get into. Um, Hey, Andrew, did you watch either one of them?
I did
Escape or
not.
Stargate?
And
I
I was
thought I've
actually,
seen the movie Stargate.
yeah, Stargate I saw, but I was thinking I was getting it mixed up with Babylon 5 because I remember,
Hmm.
there was a Star Trek show, of course, Deep Space Nine, which of course I know you call Deep Sleep Nine, or it was actually a
I
cat.
don't call it
No,
that.
yeah, it was a cat. It was
Marina
Marina
Sirtis
Sirtis.
calls that.
You called
She's
it
a
Deep
goddess,
Sleep
and I
Nine.
will listen to her whenever she says.
But I loved Deep Space Nine. So I was
Yeah,
trying to. I was Babylon 5. I was thinking about, not
yeah.
Farscape. So yeah,
Yeah,
scratch.
Farscape was more fun, I think, than Babylon 5.
Okay.
Largely, yeah. There's
Yeah,
there's a couple of really good comedic episodes in Babylon 5, but in a general sense, yeah.
yeah.
But in Babylon 5 I feel, is in a way a descendant of Star Blazers, because of the long form format. And in a way, a more successful Star Blazers because J. Michael Straczynski really had an idea of just doing a 5-year storyline with this series. I guess successful in terms of a certain, or more ambitious in concept. Although Star Blaze was totally groundbreaking, and it reminds me of what Andrew had posted about like best theme song of a cartoon
Oh yeah, I
series.
still know that theme song.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the thing is, it's like Robotech has a theme, has theme music.
Right.
At the very beginning, but no words, whereas Star Blazers has actual words, and it honestly cannot be beat.
I'm going to be the old codger here too a little bit. As much as as much as I like the Robotech music, and the Star Blazer, not the Star Blazers, Galaxy Rangers music. For me, the number one cartoon theme is still Johnny Quest, the original
Oh
Johnny Quest.
Oh
yes,
yeah.
that's
Oh
a
yeah,
good one.
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah.
And a more recent one, of course, is Cowboy Bebop.
Oh my gosh, I love
Oh, yeah.
Yoko Kanno. I love
Yeah,
her.
she's terrific.
She's like, I'm just you can't see it, maybe you can, but I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about that score. Oh my
Well,
Yeah.
God.
that makes me think too, because yeah, I mean you've been in the genre for so long. Like what is some of the modern sci-fi that you think is doing it right now? Something that's really really good that's out there right now.
Well, one thing we watch regularly is a Canadian show called The Murdoch Mysteries.
I've heard of that one.
It's kind of a steampunk show. The main character, William Murdoch, it starts in 1890, and over the years, it's actually come up to about 1910. And Murdoch is a detective and an inventor, and a lot of times the stuff he comes up with is a couple years ahead of the curve. But sometimes they'll go full steampunk and they'll give us a robot or a death ray or something. Like once or twice a season they'll do that. And they also like doing cameos of real people like H.G. Wells,
Mhm.
Edgar Rice Burroughs, Conan Doyle.
Wow, I
Uh,
just looked it up. There's like 18 seasons of this
18
show.
yes,
seasons. Yes.
yes,
13 of them are
Oh,
on Hulu. So if you have Hulu and want to check it out, that's there.
yeah,
But wow. Wow,
go
that's
Canada,
crazy.
man.
Yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to think what other science fiction we've been watching right now. Not a whole lot. As Brian will tell you, we both have our medical challenges right now, so I've kind of fallen behind on Trek and a lot of the Marvel stuff. What I've seen of Star Trek: Brave New World, Strange New Worlds, I really really like.
Yeah.
The other shows, I don't have an opinion on, but what I've seen of Strange New Worlds, I really like.
That one is beautiful, and it feels like the original. It feels like if the original was made today, this is what it would look like, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a modern take on an old thing. Yeah.
They have a great chemistry and a sort of sure,
Yes,
let's
for
try it
sure.
attitude. We'll do a musical, we'll do,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, they definitely have fun with it.
Those are the two that come to mind immediately for me in any case.
And because I dragged Andrew into the world of Lost, like overall, like what was your feeling about Lost? Because it's one of my favorite shows of all time.
Oh, I liked it quite a bit. Um, it they were trying to do something. It's interesting to kind of compare it to The Prisoner. They were trying to do something that had a very distinctive flavor to it, but because it was in this corporate structure that the corporate people kept trying to drag it in and make it more traditional. So there's always
Mhm.
this give and take on Lost, in my mind, anyway.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely saw that in the middle of like season three, I think, is where they struggled a little bit when they were really battling with the execs before they got their end date and got to start writing for what they wanted to do.
Right.
Let's see, I'm trying to think what other great sci-fi shows there have been, in the 2000s. Lost
Battlestar
was
Galactica comes to mind.
Yeah.
both actually. I'm sure you've watched the original Battlestar Galactica and then the new one.
Yeah. We didn't finish the new Battlestar Galactica, but oh yeah, we were certainly familiar with the original. I know. Oh, something that I've been dipping into on and off the last couple of years is the Ghost in the Shell properties. The original Ghost in the Shell movie, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, Those are very serious science fiction. They're not they're going with the real deal there with the singularity and what constitutes the human mind and everything. and
Oh,
and it's still a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Ghost of the Shell when it came out was one of those. Yeah, everyone will takes notice kind of movies, animated films. Like when Akira came out.
It's Akira. Okay, but going back, Yoko Kanno, who scored Bebop, I'm pretty sure scored Standalone Complex as well. So I definitely thank you for selling me on that. I did see the original. I love those questions. I've even had debates just with just people I know, like loved ones, about what is life, like what constitutes, like at what point is an AI alive,
hmm
and this whole started because we watched that movie Ex Machina. And I think I personally lean on, not that anybody asked, but I personally lean on the, if a machine feels like, if it wants to live, if it has all those things, then I'm like, you're alive. I mean, to me, I just see us, we're just organic machinery at the end of the day. The substrate is not inconsequential, but if there's consciousness, to me, I think we should give it. But the other person was like, no, it's not alive. It might be animated. It might think it's alive, but it's not alive. It's not. Oh, so you're saying if it's not organic, it's not alive? Yes. And I'm like, I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe that's a debate we can have on the show or not. But
Yeah,
anyway,
Andrew. Yeah, to your point, yeah, it's one of those timeless questions. It really is because it comes down to like, okay, how do you prove that you are alive, that you have a soul or something? Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have one. I feel like there's a consciousness within me, and you're surrounded by people and they resemble you and stuff like that. We take it just
granted.
based on that they too must have a soul, and by the way, this ties into Star Trek, because I've been rewatching select episodes of Next Generation, and I'm having a good time because it's in preparation for me watching Picard. So I'm
Right.
working toward that. But one of the episodes of Star Trek Next Generation is regarded as one of the best episodes of the series. It's called The Measure of a Man.
hmm
If you might
Oh,
remember, it's about
yeah,
data, and it's essentially about AI. And
right.
does he have control of what he wants to do in his life? The choices he makes, are they as important as any other person in that ship? It's an excellent episode. I had watched the preferred version, in which there were scenes that didn't make the actual airing of the episode,
Oh, okay.
but they put some things back into it, and they're more like little character moments, little interactions between the core characters, in Star Trek. And it's an essential episode for anyone who is interested in either Star Trek or science fiction in general,
Oh,
and
couple
AI. Yeah.
couple little sidebars here. Every once in a while, we go back to the original series. And part of the attraction to that original Star Trek, part of the attraction to that is you can see the excitement. You can feel the excitement. It was like, we can do this type of story. We can do this type of story. We can have the characters interact this way. And, the energy is there. An anecdote about Ghost in the Shell, a standalone complex. I don't know how much of this you might remember. The villain in that had this icon that he would use that would hide him from the surveillance cameras. And a couple of years after I saw that series the first time, my wife and I and our friend of ours were on vacation, and we had stopped, I think, somewhere in Virginia to fill up the gas in the car, and I pulled the gas pump out. And the icon from Ghost in the Shell was on a sticker attached to the pump. I was like,
Love it.
they almost had to pick me up from the floor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
God only knows who had it.
Just going back to a few questions about Robotech that
Sure.
I've got for you. Your stuff, in a way, has inspired some of the more recent things that have come out. The Robotech franchise, the RPGs, and the occasional comic book story. For instance, Robotech Remix was drawn by Elmer Damaso, right? Who
Right.
you had worked on with for the Robotech
Check Voltron.
Robotech Voltron crossover comic.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, it's beautifully drawn. It has Miria Zentradi
Uh-huh.
in this series, and it's very much a follow up to the multiverse kind of thing that was going on with the adjectiveless Robotech title that preceded it. Miria, a character you're very familiar with because of Magdalene Uprisings, right? Um, she's a Dentrati, but in this remix story, she's shown as genetically enhanced advantage in strength, speed, and agility, and
Okay.
presumably better than your regular human being, right? And
Right.
because she's Dentrati, right?
Right.
But I can't help thinking if that's the case, I think Max probably wouldn't have survived his fight with Miria during his courtship of her, despite his own formidable reflexes, right?
Yeah,
So,
that would be my guess. That
so
would be my
how do you
guess.
see? Yeah, so how do you see Micronized Centrali's physical qualities when compared to Earth people? I guess you sort of answered that already, but I know you had established that Zentradi are they're immune to radioactivity in the very first issue of Mountain Uprisings, right? And
Yeah.
also, Reattack can survive in the vacuum of space at full size, as established by the animated series.
Yeah.
But, or is there, what are your thoughts?
Uh,
Humans and
I think
physiology.
I don't think micronized and Trotty are appreciably different than humans. I mean, some will be stronger, some will be weaker. I guess that was the guidelines I went by.
I think it's enough that they can survive in the vacuum of space, at least at full size, and what you gave them as their immunity to radiation. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay, that's
Well,
pretty good.
I think those were useful skills. I thought those were useful skills when you were in combat.
Yeah, yeah, right. So,
Useful terms.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
One of the things about Centrati, which we haven't talked about here, again, poor Brian has heard most of this stuff one way or another, but I sort of started to play with a Centrati language. And it wasn't super sophisticated, but I just wanted to have lay down uh, some benchmarks so that if you had Susan and Charlie talking to each other, it wouldn't sound like complete gibberish, like it was
Mhm.
random sounds. I know. But the interesting thing that as that evolved though was is that I enjoyed working with it because it taught you could see how Zentradi thought because of the way they spoke about stuff. A short phrase "steniar," which we used to translate as complete the mission. That got to be used very flexibly, and but it illustrated the way they thought. Yeah, Jim Lucino talked about Miria using Stenyar on Dana, and sometimes it's just finish cleaning up your room, damn it.
yeah, right, right. Yeah, you know what? And remix, I have to mention remix again because there are bits of your Zentradi translated words were in the remix comic
Oh,
book.
good.
Yeah, like such as Carathon. What does that mean?
Okay. I That has something to do with death. It's either a ritualistic execution, or it may have been shorthand for. I'm digging deep, guys. I'm sorry, but I think I used Carathon at one point for the Centrali would recycle, and you could just put bodies in the recycler aboard the ship, but sometimes on Earth they would leave them out for the vultures.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's got more. It has more than one meaning depending on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
situation, right? Yeah, so Carathon was definitely used, and also Car Yar.
If I may. And it actually has to do with the creating and interacting with like the audience. Like you talk about, you create something and then how is it received? So for example, creation with the audience. Now, I wanted to create because I had something I wanted to share with the universe. I just had to get it out. So I made 3 music videos that were Robotech or Voltron oriented, and I took clips from the shows and set it to music. What surprised me about these music videos and how they were interacted with on YouTube was my favorite one was not the most popular one. The first one I did, the one that was the most amateurish one, was like the one that exploded, you know? So, compared to the other two.
Yeah.
So I guess my question to you is number one, if you could pick your top three creations that you think say, this is who I am, like what would they be for the podcast to share with the podcast? And then number two, was there anything that surprised you as far as you put this out and people really liked it or people didn't like? I just want to get your take on both of those things.
Yeah, there were a couple of things. The very end of Malcontent Uprisings, the 12th issue is something I'm particularly proud of because it kind of pushed the idea of like, no, I don't know everything this other person went through, but I can still respect it, and I can still, treat that person with respect. And that's the whole symbolism behind getting the haircut and the whole thing. Well, that's one thing that comes to mind. Um, the other thing is that as soon as Malcontents 1 came out, we were getting letters where people were incorporating what centrality I had in that first issue into the letters. I was already getting feedback that fast, and you can't beat that.
Yeah. Nice.
So the current RPG, Robotech RPG that's out right now, they're making use of your mecha creations, the stingers, which are essentially mecha that's cobbled together. Upper half might be Centrati female powered armor, and then the lower half might be battle pod, reverse articulated legs, or and then it may have Veritech Battloid arms. So that's a stinger, right? So they're making use of that concept, and a bit of RPG artwork was inspired by your comic Invid War. It shows like an attack on the Invid main hive in the generation, and there's this mecha that's missing its upper half and is on fire. Yeah, that's based on a panel. So I don't know if you were aware of that, but or not. But what do you think of how people are adding to the lore these days, or drawing inspiration from what you had done?
Oh, I think it's great. Strange Machine Games. I haven't really read a full module from them. But I know Strange Machine Games has always been very conscientious about putting my name in the acknowledgments. So I'm good. I'm good with anything they do. I think with the Stingers originally, part of the idea with the Stingers uh, was to help show the Zentradi status, but also to create as much visual variety. I mean, I was always kind of figuring out, well, how do I get a new mecha into here? What should it look like, and what should it do, and all that sort of thing.
It's such a cool idea, to be honest. It just really adds to the whole like hidden guerrilla warfare tactics that are being used by the malcontents of the time. They're just working with the resources they had.
Right. Yeah. I understand. I understand. Strange Machine Games has been very good with the comics that I've been involved with. So yeah.
There's a precedent first set by you, continued by Jim, who somehow it went a little even like darker in a way with some things.
Oh, in a couple of places, yeah. I just finished reading the Rick Hunter comic, and they're pretty good at respecting malcontents and Rick Hunter. It's a very condensed version of malcontents, but it's there.
I have to say, it's probably the best received of the modern Robotech comics.
Okay, well, we sort of seem to be winding down.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say it's been is getting a little late, and we don't want to keep you up too long, but it's been super. Just amazing having you on and just being able to kind of walk through your kind of professional life and personal life a little bit too, and just see kind of what makes you tick and what made, to be fair, a big name in Robotech. And I think that's really cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, I really, I want to say thank you for coming on. It's been a great experience for me. I can't speak for everybody else, but I think I can. That it was a lot of fun, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. I had a good time too. Yeah, and I'll certainly be promoting this episode on Facebook once you get it posted.
yeah, I'll post it as quickly as I can. I want to spend a little time on it, make sure I get it right. Have Bryant send me some of the pictures and stuff that he's got, and we can try and gussy it up so it's not just our four faces looking like a bunch of mugs on here, and and make it something that's worth watching.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
Hey, you too.
Yeah, you too, Bill. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for everyone.